Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. Today was day 48 of the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings, and today was a big day, an important day, but I suspect for many it'll be a disappointing day as well. We heard today for the first time from the spouse of 19 years of the killer Gabriel Wortman, Lisa Banfield. Now, Miss Banfield testified today. Really very short. It was about 3 hours long, which was strange given that she is, by most people's estimation, the most important witness of this entire proceeding, of the entire Mass Casualty Commission inquiry. But she testified today for merely about 3 hours in total, a little bit of follow-up questioning afterwards. I say disappointing because we didn't learn a lot of new information or insight from Miss Banfield, and I note that just as I record this, I know that many of the family members have walked out on proceedings before she's finished speaking, so that's certainly a signal of their thoughts and their observations of watching her testify today. It's hard to know really what to make of Lisa Banfield. On the, she's had 2 years plus, 2 years and a few months to think about what she wants to say. She's had lots of time to prepare. She has legal advice from one of the top lawyers in Canada, James Lockyer, who's doing his best to protect her. And she's had a chance to hear everybody else's account of what's taken place. So it's difficult, to know how much stock to put into her answers, given that she's had so much time to prepare. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, she is most certainly a victim of domestic violence. There's been many witnesses who've come forward to say that they've observed this or were certainly aware of her status as a victim of domestic violence at the hands of Gabriel Wortman. And yet, on the other hand, she's living there in she's got a home, she's got a very nice cottage, warehouse, expensive car, expensive lifestyle, many trips down south, no kids to protect. So one might think there's less pressure on her than there might be on many others to stay in this kind of an abusive relationship. So it's a very complicated situation. And Miss Banfield has complicated motives as well in this situation. We don't know whether it was a condition of her restorative justice process to testify today, to appear before the commission. There was some question as to whether she would, given the fact that she had outstanding criminal charges. But those charges were resolved to an extent by having them referred to restorative justice, which typically means you do something outside of court, an apology letter, community service, that sort of thing. It can be tailored to the individual, and then you come back, the charges are withdrawn. We don't know, and Ms. Banfield was not asked today whether among those conditions or her conditions or commitments was that she would testify at the proceedings, and then that would be part of her restorative justice process. She also has civil issues to concern herself with because there was a large estate left by Gabriel Wortman. She would typically be entitled to that, except now she's been sued by the families of this. She's been sued by the families of the victims in a class action, and they are trying to get those hundreds of thousands of dollars, potentially more, from his estate to go to the victims. So she has an interest in protecting her own interests in that scenario as well. I noticed early on, just on that note, that Miss Banfield was talking in one of her very first answers about the denturist clinic in Dartmouth. It was owned by Gabriel Wortman, but she worked there. And she referred to it as our clinic. As though, and Miss Natal, the Mass Casualty Commission lawyer, was questioning her. In her response or her next question, called it his clinic. That's an important distinction. Now, she wouldn't have been considered a direct owner of that, but in a common law, and so in a matrimonial property situation, married couple gets divorced, the presumption is they divide 50-50. A common law couple, when they separate, the presumption is both people walk away with what they brought in or what is theirs, unless you can make a constructive trust argument that you are entitled to some of the assets of the other. So to do a constructive trust argument, one of the things you would do is say, well, I contributed to the business success of the other through my efforts, and that's why it's so valuable, and therefore you're entitled to it. Well, Miss Banfield would certainly, and she said some of this in her interviews and a little bit today, contributed to the success of his denturist clinic. Now, that's not where all his money came from. Some of it seemed to have come from illegal activities and under the table sort of things, but she wasn't taking any responsibility or accepting any role in that element of his life, which I'll come to in a second. So she's in her early answers was sort of establishing an entitlement to his assets through her contributions to his business, but then very quickly, on the other hand, downplayed any knowledge of friends or friendships that he had developed in the Portapique area. They were living in Dartmouth. She says he would go up there, spend long weekends, 4 or 5 days at a time sometimes, or sometimes weeks at a time without her. And so she was not there often enough to understand exactly everything that was going on. So she's creating some distance from herself from any of the nefarious activities that he may have been, within which he may have been engaged. All very interesting. So thinking of her different motivations in giving her testimony today. Now, she was being questioned by Gillian Nattau from the Mass Casualty Commission, and interestingly, from my perspective at least, not Emily Hill, who was the lead commission counsel, not Roger Burrell either, who I would have thought would have been in that realm as well. It was a bit of a surprise, but, you know, I was thinking about this yesterday, that Ms. Nattau is a little more, or any other lawyer from the Mass Casualty Commission, a little more expendable in a sense than Ms. Hill, who's the lead lawyer. I compared in the written piece to putting in your backup goalie or a third string pitcher in a big game, and, you know, if things don't go well, you blame them. When I was younger, sometimes I'd get picked up for big tournaments. You're allowed to go away to nationals with another team from your province if your team didn't win provincials. And so I've been to nationals, and, you know, you're the third or fourth pitcher on a team. You're not the main pitcher. So you'd go to play against Ontario or BC, some of the big teams, and, you know, you'd be thrown to the wolves and sort of sacrificed in those games. Well, I was thinking about that with Ms. Nattau today. If things didn't go well, it wasn't going to be lead counsel Hill that was getting the blame. It also wasn't going to be the commissioners. In their introduction, actually in their decision yesterday, when they denied Patterson Law's motion to have allow cross-examination, they said, well, we have commission counsel. They are objective and tenacious. They're there to ask all the questions in the public interest and in their pursuit of the truth and the goals of the commission. So the commissioners weren't going to take responsibility for what's taken place today. It all rested on the shoulders of Ms. Nattau, so that's a heavy burden. So that was interesting, I thought, as well. Now, the other thing that came out very early on, right away, actually, Commissioner Fitch, in doing her introduction, said that no questions would be asked about the supplying of ammunition by Miss Banfield to Wortman or spouse, because the criminal proceedings in that matter have not yet resolved. So these are the criminal proceedings. Miss Banfield was charged with supplying ammunition, and then the matter was referred to restorative justice. That was back in March. Here we are in July. That would normally just take a few months. It's something you do outside of court. It can be done very quickly, and you come back and the charges are withdrawn. Now, unless one of the conditions was participation in the proceedings today, then that process should have been completed by now. And had it been completed, then Miss Banfield would have been much more free and open to speak about all of these things without any risk that she would be jeopardizing herself in a criminal context. So that was interesting as well, that they didn't wait for that process to be completed, or more to the point that the process wasn't completed before today, as it would have been in the ordinary course of things in any other case where I've been involved. So that's a little interesting legal point, I think. Now, Ms. Banfield, in her questions, she was giving very short answers, I felt. She denied really anything that might have been incriminating, and she was giving very short yes or no answers to things, usually no, about knowledge of something that if she had said yes, it would have generated further questions. Well, typically would have. I'm not sure if Miss Natal was going to follow up on any points that were made, really. There was one point where, Miss Banfield broke down and was very upset about, feeling a guilt and all this stuff. And then Miss Natal just sort of carried on without sort of probing into those questions, which I think would have been something the public, the family members would have been interested to hear Miss Banfield expand on her thoughts on that. So it didn't happen. We didn't learn much new information from Miss Banfield. She was asked about the various people around the community and if Wortman had any grievances with them. And it was no all around. But we know that's not quite true because Miss McCulley in particular, Lisa McCulley, there was a dispute over dogs going from Miss McCulley's yard in towards the warehouse property. There were emails back and forth from Miss Banfield and Miss McCulley on that point. And we know that Gabriel Wortman and Lisa McCulley had a short affair, and Miss Banfield knew about this. So very strange when she was asked about Miss McCulley and just completely denied any insight into any potential motivations the killer may have had there. She was asked about the mock cruiser. She displayed no concern throughout the time that Wortman was putting this cruiser together. I mean, here's a guy that has an arsenal of weapons. He's been violent with her, all of these things, and no concern. She denied that he drove the vehicle anywhere, even though she talked about him taking it outside cleaning it, washing the vehicle. And she also, there was a witness from the Mercedes dealership in Halifax who had provided a statement where he said that Wortman dropped Miss Banfield off in the fully marked car. Now, she denies that. So, not sure what to make of all of those things. Also, there were no questions asked and no insight provided or answers provided about the crossing of the U.S. border. I mean, this is maybe the main issue from the perspective of firearms and access to firearms for Wortman. He was able to cross the U.S.-Canada border with illegal firearms, dangerous, high-capacity firearms, and Miss Banfield knew about this, or she had some secondhand information about it. I talked about that in previous videos, but wasn't asked about it today and didn't say anything about it. So very little learned about relevant details from Miss Banfield. Something that was emerging, I think, in her discussion of Aaron Tuck and the Tuck family, that she didn't put this together, but I'm starting to put together that there's a bit of a property theme or property grievance theme to Wortman's targets. There was Aaron Tuck. Wortman had tried to buy the property from the Tuck family, didn't offer enough money, it didn't go through. Miss McCulley's property was previously owned by Wortman's uncle. He had tried to rip off his uncle and get the property, but unsuccessfully. The Glension property we heard today, Miss Banfield saying that she had complimented the property, so maybe that set him off in a weird way. The Zal Thomas property was previously owned by Brenda and George Forbes, with whom Wortman had a major beef, forced them to move away. So there's some property really, he had nothing against the Zals or Mr. Zal or Miss Thomas, from what we learned, but seemed to have a thing against the previous owners and took it out on the property, possibly. So that's starting to form as a potential, unreasonable, of course, but potential motivation. She was asked about Miss Banfield was asked about Greg Wiley, Constable Greg Wiley, who has claimed to have visited Wortman 15, 16 times over the course of a few years. She said that she met him only once, and it was while they were out driving, and then twice, I guess, because after the threats that Wortman made to go to Moncton and kill his parents, Constable Wiley was the one of all people, of all officers, chosen to go to his cottage. He was shown an old musket, non-functional, and then another gun, an old gun that was filled with wax and inoperable. And he left. He never spoke to Miss Banfield individually. He never did any independent search of the property on his own. So that was Constable Wiley. Very curious relationship there. We'll be hearing from Constable Wiley at some later date. Now, as to the events themselves, I mean, she wasn't asked to retell their story of trauma, so we didn't get to hear why nobody found the jacket that she says she threw away. That could be explained, I'm sure, maybe if it got caught on a fire or Wortman picked it up himself. Wasn't asked about the slippers that were found in DeBert that seemed to have been female slippers, size 8, probably hers. She does now, when she talks about going into the woods, and she talked about hearing a quick snippet of conversation, like a "hey boys," something like that, and then gunshots, which seem to have described the shooting of Corey Ellison. Now, what's curious, though, is, and I talked about this yesterday, that she didn't really seem to describe the 6 or 7 hours that she was in the woods and explain why she didn't come out of the woods earlier or talk about anything else that she may have heard. Because here she claims not to have heard the ERT vehicle, which went into the community and rescued Clinton Ellison, who was also hiding in the woods, perhaps even close by where she was. They were calling over the loudspeaker for him, so she didn't hear any of that, she said. So that's also a curious thing, which she didn't really satisfactorily, at least, answer. Now, Miss Banfield, why I keep saying that. 2 leases, but still. Miss Banfield was emotional at times, and she was emotional when she was describing the violence that she suffered. She was also emotional when she was talking briefly about about the people that were killed, and how she felt that if she hadn't hidden, if she hadn't gotten away, that maybe they would have been spared. That he was just after her, which may be true. She's feeling some guilt about that. Although she wasn't asked the inverse of that question as to why she thought, or did she think about whether it was reasonable for Wortman to take off then and abandon his search for her, if indeed that's what he was committed to doing. So. All of that was so. There's still questions remaining. Now, one of the lawyers, I know Michael Scott mentioned earlier in one of his interviews, that it may have been less traumatic for Miss Banfield. I mean, she was only on the stand for 3 hours. It didn't look like she was terribly traumatized by having to give the testimony. It may have been less traumatic for her to actually have sat through a couple of days of testimony rather than doing the 4 statements to the police, the 5 statements, interviews with Mass Casualty Commission investigators, and then the reenactments. Instead, just sit down and be examined, be cross-examined for a few days, as would be befitting a witness. I mean, geez, have witnesses going for a few days is not unusual in a criminal case, a civil case, any kind of case, an inquiry. So very curious that we only heard 3 hours from Miss Banfield today. Now, I know some people will be listening to this or reading this or watching her testimony and say, well, we must forgive all of Miss Banfield's shortcomings, the shortcomings of her evidence, given her status as a victim. Now, people feel that way, that's fine for them, but I think most people would expect a little more from somebody who was supposed of the largest mass killer in Canadian history for 19 years. So for people not inclined to just give a blanket forgiveness, I don't think Miss Banfield has likely changed many minds. The family members left in protest. Now, if this testimony today was simply to fulfill a commitment that she made in the restorative justice process, well, I guess she can say, yes, I appeared and testified. Well, she did the bare minimum, if that was the commitment. Really, what seemed to me her goal today was to get through the day as quickly and painlessly as possible to protect her civil claim to the estate. It was probably her main goal in all of this. So that meant establishing, a contribution to his business and denying any knowledge of his wrongdoings or his motivations or his access to weapons or his, anything to do with the mock cruiser, anything that would tie her from a civil claim perspective to his actions and the killings. So, if she can successfully do that, that might entitle her to half that estate, with the Wortman half of his estate going to the victims and their families. So I'm sure that was her main goal today. She went a little ways in accomplishing that, but I wouldn't think that that's going to satisfy the families or the families of the victims or their lawyers involved in the civil claim. So we'll see how that develops. That is it for this week. It was a busy week for the commission, busy week for everybody involved. Pressure-filled day in some ways. Next week is going to be mostly panel discussions. There is a foundational document presentation of the financial misdealings of Gabriel Wortman, and there's going to be a witness as well, Constable Troy Maxwell, whose account is in dispute. We heard from Brenda Forbes about her discussion, her report to the police about Wortman. Constable Maxwell was the officer who received that report, so we'll hear from him as to his perspective on all that. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.